Today we're going to talk about classifying angles. We are working with the GCO9 standard, and our learning goal for this video is to classify angles as adjacent, vertical, or linear pairs. Adjacent angles are two angles that share a common vertex and a common side. Okay, so we've got two angles, and if I draw a picture here, we've got angle ABC and angle CB, let's call this D. And these are adjacent angles because they have, sorry about that, they have this side here that they share, and they have this vertex of B that they share. And so because they have a common side and a common vertex, these are considered adjacent angles. Okay, let's look at this one. So if we had an angle that looked like this, are these adjacent angles? Well, they have a common side that they share, and they have a common vertex that they share. And so these again would be adjacent angles because they have a common side and a common vertex. I meant to do that as a line. What if we had, so this is A, B, C, and we're going to call this D and E. And I want to know what kind of relationship is angle ABC and DBE? Well, so I'm looking for this angle here and this angle here. Are these adjacent angles? They're not adjacent angles. They have a common vertex right here. Their vertex is the same, but they don't share a common side. And so because they don't share a common side, they're just angles. And we're going to talk about what kind of angles they are. They happen to be vertical angles, but they're not adjacent angles because the only thing that they share is a common vertex. Okay, a linear pair. Let's look at this line, this word linear. Linear. Linear pair. Do you see the word line in there? Line. Okay, so a linear pair is two adjacent angles that have non-common sides that form a line. That should say form a line. Form a line. Okay, so if we look at this, and we have A, B, and C, and C, B, D. These are adjacent angles because they share this vertex here and this side, but the non-common sides, side AB and side BD, form a straight line. Okay, so because they form a line, these are considered a linear pair because they form a line. Okay, now if we look back, we have this. Okay, we've got two adjacent angles here again because they have this vertex and this side, but do our non-common sides form a line? Does this side and this side, our non-common sides, form a line? And the answer is no. So these would not be a linear pair. They are adjacent angles because they have a common vertex and this common side here, but they're not, the non-common sides don't form a straight line, so they're not a linear pair. And then what about this angle here? Let's talk about that. Okay, so would this angle here and this angle here be considered a linear pair? Well, the answer is no. They're not a linear pair because they're not adjacent angles. Okay, they're not adjacent angles. Now, if we were talking about this angle here, and then this angle here, we could say, yes, they are a linear pair. But if you're specifically looking at this angle and this angle, then we would say, no, they are not. Okay, vertical angles. Two non-adjacent angles that are formed by two intersecting lines. So we're looking at this angle here and this angle here. So two non-adjacent angles that are formed by two intersecting lines. Now these are non-adjacent because they only have a common vertex. They don't have any shared sides. Okay, so vertical angles are always congruent to each other. Always. They're formed by two non-adjacent angles that are formed by two intersecting lines. So if this angle over here was x degrees, then this angle down here is x degrees. Okay? Now how many pairs of vertical angles are formed by two intersecting lines? Well, we've got these angles here, and you have these angles here. Those angles are also vertical angles. So whenever you have two intersecting lines, two pairs of vertical angles are formed. Okay, and let's just look at this set of angles here. Well, we've got these two sets of vertical angles, but each piece, like we've got the blue and the red, and together they make a linear pair. And on the other side, we've got a blue and a red, and they make a linear pair. Okay, so we've got these angles that have these intertwined relationships with each other. But vertical angles are simply angles that are formed when two lines intersect, and it's the angles that are opposite of the vertex. Okay. And the relationship between vertical angles are that vertical angles are congruent to each other. Okay, so if you have two lines that intersect, and we've got this is angle 1, 2, 3, and 4, then the vertical angles here are going to be angles 1 and 3, and then we have angle 2 and 4. Okay, so those are the vertical angles. Now the linear pairs would be angles 2 and angle 3, and then we have angle 1 and angle 4. Okay, and the linear pairs would also be the adjacent angles. Okay, so the adjacent angles are going to be the ones that have the common vertex, which all of them have a common vertex, but that also share a common side. Okay, so we've got angles 2 and angle 3, they're linear pairs. Angles 1 and angle 4, they're linear pairs. What about angles 1 and angle 2? Are those linear pairs as well? They are, because they have this shared side right here. Okay, and then what about angles 3 and angle 4? They're also linear pairs. And so these are my adjacent angles and the linear pairs, because linear pairs are adjacent angles that form a line with their non-common sides. Okay, so vertical angles are congruent. Linear pairs form a line, which means that they have a sum of 180 degrees, and we're going to talk about this in just a second. But when when they have a sum, when two angles have a sum of 180 degrees, we call them supplementary angles. Okay, so if we go back and we look at your learning goal for this particular thing, I can classify angles as adjacent, vertical, or linear pairs. So hopefully you're able to do that now. And if we just take a quick look, okay, what are angles 1 and angle 2? Are they adjacent angles? Are they vertical angles? Or are they linear pairs? Well, They're adjacent and linear pairs. Okay? What are angles 1 and 3? Well, angles 1 and 3 are just simply vertical angles, and recall that vertical angles are congruent to each other. What about angles 1 and 2 here? Well, these would simply be adjacent angles because they share this common vertex and they share this common side.